Class is in session.
And welcome to On Learn 16. Class is in session. Guys, somebody's asked me to do this particular podcast, and I realized I'd never done it before. I don't understand how I haven't stepped into this world. So today, we're going to talk about gender and sex. Not the dodgy kind, so get your minds out of the gutter. It's not a how-to video. We are going to talk about gender and sex and the differences between them and the way in which gender as a social construction has embedded itself in our world and the problems that it's causing and the pushback we are now getting based on trying to blow up those dichotomies or trying to blow up those sort of foundational ideals of society that a lot of people cling to with such, let's say, well, insane desperation. So let's start at the beginning. Gender, sex. Sex are the parts in which you are born with. That's it. That's all. That's all. Some people say it's your chromosomes. Some people say it's your parts. And I'm going to say something really quickly about sex. Just so we're all aware, there's not even two sexes. There's not only two sexes. In fact, I believe there are eight scientific classifications for different chromosomal configurations that make up technically 8 delineated sexes. So I'm going to put that over there. I'm not going to, this isn't a science podcast. I can't possibly exist in that world. I am not smart enough for that. So I'm going to go step over into the social sciences with gender. So if there are generally speaking, let's sort of put this into play, two predominant sexes, male, female, right? You're born, what parts are you born with? Then that transfers into something we call gender. And gender are the sociological and physical characteristics we choose to express as a reflection of our sex. And what society has done is they've, over time, and this changes, this is how we know it's a social construction, not a genetic finality. As society progresses, they decide what it is to be born with, as a man or a woman, and then what roles we are to fill. For example, how do we dress? How do we speak? How do we cut our hair? What colors are common? What jobs and roles we fulfill? And all of that has a sort of a list that goes along with it that then describes our gender, our feminine or our masculine qualities. And since predominantly we have two sexes, we've come up with two genders. Now, on the front end, it seems fine. It doesn't even seem, if we can say for a minute, that we don't prioritize one set of gender characteristics over the other, which we do, and I'm going to get to that in a second, because that is the basis of sexism. Let's assume we don't. The mere classification, the mere list, limits, for the most part, what men and women are allowed to express as a part of that gender identity that we see walking around the world. Because at the end of the day, people aren't walking around with their clothes off. So we don't necessarily immediately aren't able to tell what sex they are. The way we want to decide that is by the markers and by their clothes and their style and all of that stuff that goes along with how I can quickly identify them. We are also in a society where identifying people and putting them into a box makes us all comfortable. Why? Well, because if I know what somebody is, a man or a woman, I will then know how to interact. That's pure and simple. I love it when people often, and a lot of my listeners know that this happens to me often, when people ask me, are you a boy or a girl? Because I get that often. If you're not watching me right now, you've never seen me and you're just listening, go take a look at a picture. And people ask me if I'm a boy or a girl all the time. And my instinct, my response is, why do you want to know? I don't really care that you want to know. I'm curious. Like, it doesn't bother me. I don't get offended by it, but I'm curious on the why. Because all I can think about, especially when I'm just interacting with you virtually, all I can think about is either you want to figure out if you can date me, which is funny because A, I'm not available, but B, um, you're only going to decide if you're attracted to me based on the sex I tell you I am, or you're trying to put me in a category so you know how to speak to me. Either one, I don't care about. So let's go back at the beginning of gender, because a lot of people say, Joanne, it's not a social construction. Let's give a list, shall we? Let's make a list of feminine qualities, typical, all of this is typical, guys. Typical feminine characteristics and masculine. Feminine. Here we go. Long hair, curvy body type, hips, chest, smooth skin, delicate features, higher voice. And I don't mean higher voice by pitch, I mean higher voice in the way that we actually speak, purposefully. Clothes we wear. We are supposed to be more maternal. We are supposed to be better caretakers, women, right? The feminine. More nurturing, more emotional. We're supposed to be better at cooperating, team building, all of that. Those are feminine. I know that's not a complete list. And here's some masculine. Masculine, strong, independent, rational, short hair, what, baggy pants as opposed to a woman wearing a dress, sweatshirts, suit and a tie, muscles. All of those things are relatively, typically masculine qualities. So, giving these two lists is problematic in and of themselves. And giving these two lists is automatically limiting both sexes to how they can express themselves, how they wish to be seen, how they feel most comfortable. And we create something called a dichotomy or a binary. And this is a term you'll hear thrown around a lot, and a lot of people don't even understand what it means. But this idea of a binary is you're either this or that. It's either yes or no, man or woman, masculine or feminine, right? Republican or Democrat, liberal or conservative. Pick something. Pick something and stand in it. The problem with gender and the problem with these constructions, nobody fits either category fully, completely. And if they do fit it to a significant proportionality, the question is, were they born that way or were they conditioned to be that way? And that's where we get into social construction or gender as a social construction rather than gender being a genetic expression of your biology. Because there's nothing saying the parts that I'm born with all of a sudden make me want to put on lipstick. That's ridiculous. The parts that I'm born with doesn't make me throw a dress on. The parts I'm born with has nothing to do with how long my hair is. But what it has to do with is what is the cultural and societal expectation of the day when it comes to my sex as it relates to my gender. And man, we're really pushing envelopes now, right? Kids are pushing envelopes. Kids don't like the binary. So you're hearing more and more kids saying, I'm non-binary. I don't fall into one of those camps. Because at the end of the day, they're right. They're right. That binary existence has never existed. And we are just consistently trying to perpetuate it for lots of reasons. I'm going to get to them in a second. So let me get to how do we condition this? Well, it happens right when you're born. Right when you're born, a lot of the time, and again, remember I'm being typical here, a lot of the time a name is chosen. A name is chosen to indicate your sex. Why? Well, because we want to know right from the get-go what sex you are. Because what sex you are positions you in this world. Well, why? And as soon as we hold that baby, now maybe brand new, spanking new, We hold them very similarly, but relatively quickly, when that baby can hold up their own head or that baby gets strong enough to sort of have a little bit of control over their own bodies, we treat them very differently. We put pink on the girls and blue on the boys. Again, typically. Why? What does a color have to do with our sex? What are we denoting? Well, one, we're denoting some fragility. The other one, we're denoting strength. And as soon as they're born and they're able to hold their head up and, control their own body, we start using different words to describe both children. You couldn't tell them apart at all unless you were changing a diaper. But all of a sudden, the little girls, we hold closer. This has been clinically proven. We hold closer. We talk to her softly. We tell her that she's beautiful. She's going to break a lot of hearts, that I'm going to protect you and I am going to love you. And that's the way we talk to our little girls. With our boys, we hold them further from our bodies. We jostle them around a little bit more. We tell them how strong they look, how powerful they are. They're going to be a great football player, right? What a man you are going to be. That starts before cognition starts. It begins immediately. So when people say, oh, well, listen, I treat my kids the same. Well, I promise you don't. I promise you don't on a basic level. Do I think you want to treat them the same? Sure. Absolutely. But almost from the hop, the clothes we buy are different, right? Little girls get dresses, boys get jeans and track pants. Why? Have you ever watched a little girl try to learn how to crawl when she's wearing a dress? It's a freaking nightmare. Why would we put that on a little girl and then say, go ahead, try to crawl? We dress up little girls constantly. You ever seen, like, especially the little girls that don't grow hair real quick? We put those headbands around them with the bow. You might as well just put a sticker on her forehead that says, I'm a girl. Please don't confuse me with a boy, because that's the worst thing you could possibly do. How ridiculous. Why do we need the delineation so much? And guys, I'm not saying I'm outside of this construction. I still do the same thing. Our friends and our family have kids. What's the first thing we ask them? I would love it to be, are they healthy? That's not the first thing. Oh my God, was it a boy or a girl? We have gender reveal parties as though you can reveal gender before the baby's even born, because people don't understand the difference between the terminology, or they're just using them interchangeably, which they're not. Technically, what you're having at your reveal parties is a chromosome reveal party. You should just throw double X chromosomes at the couple or an X and a Y. See if they can dodge them. That would be a funny sex reveal party. And then we start giving them toys. And again, typically, right? I know some of you are like, I gave my little girl G.I. Joes. Okay, I'm going to talk about that in a second. Little girls get dolls, some more dolls, some baking stuff, some kitchen stuff, play with like some clothing stuff, maybe even fake makeup stuff. And what do boys get? Boys get trucks. They get cars. They get building blocks. Statistically, way more. Lego tends to go to the way of the boy. You can see these divisions, and they used to be crystal clear in toy stores. Well, and a lot of them still are. I mean, the Barbie aisle is a fluorescent pink to the point where you really should wear sunglasses while walking down the aisle. And all of these images that we've tried desperately to sort of change over the years, and recently we've done some good jobs. We've tried to redesign the packaging and redesign the advertising campaign so it's not just to boys and not just to girls. I would love it. I would love it if it was because they thought they were being more gender neutral and they were being more accessible and inclusive. But let's be honest, they're trying to double their market under the lure of, right? That's their goal. But nonetheless. So boys tend to get more spatial intelligence games for the most part, more mechanical games for the most part. whereas girls get more interpersonal games and social games, dolls and clothing and things like that. And as they grow up, therein lies their foundation, right? And so in that foundation, we start teaching young girls how to be caretakers. So as they get older, we think that women are just more maternal. They're more maternal because historically, 3,000 years ago, they had to be, because otherwise the baby would die. And if they weren't maternal, the guy's out hunting somewhere. I love how people always revert to that as though we couldn't have evolved past it. But what we've done is we've taught them. We have taught them, and I will hear parents say, "Oh my God, are you taking care of your baby? Feed the baby, hold the baby, rock the baby," right? And then you have boys, "Oh, that's a huge truck. That's a great building, castle, whatever." And we watch these kids go on different roads. Having said that, are there kids that play with all toys? Of course there are. Of course there are. But we've still implanted such expectation and such learned behavior from such a young age. And a lot of psychologists that will say that 70% of who we are has been formed by the age of 5. 5. For most of us, that's before we even go to daycare. So our influence have been our parents or our families, which again, I'm not condemning. I'm saying it is limiting. It is limiting in exposure. And so we get older and kids go to school and girls act a certain way, and we think that the way that girls act is somehow indicative of what? The estrogen they don't have yet? And the way the boys act is indicative what? Of the testosterone they don't have yet? You know, when you see little boys fighting on the playground and you'll hear terminology like boys will be boys and they're rowdy like boys and all of it, all of it has been proven time and time again to be psychologically learned behavior, subconsciously learned behavior. There's no parent sitting around saying my kid will only do this for the most part. I don't think parents are sitting around trying to limit their kids. They're doing what they know. And in order to unlearn that, it takes so much uncovering and acknowledging and dispelling. And it makes us uncomfortable. And it makes us feel unsure. Because if the most primary way I see somebody, and I do believe this, a lot of people believe the first thing you see is race, or the first thing you see is race. I truly believe the first thing you see is sex. And the first thing you need to see is sex. Psychologically, because you need that first, I need you in that box first. And it is the most universal box that we put people in, right? And I think it's common through and through. Now, a lot of people will say things like, well, my daughter can do whatever she wants. She can wear a dress or she can wear pants. I want you to think that through for a second. Because it's true. We give young girls and women, for the most part, a much greater array, there's limits, of gender expression. For example, girls can play with G.I. Joes, they can play hockey, they can play baseball, they can fight in the play. All girls can do all these things, right? Girls can grow up and become doctors and lawyers. I want you to think very clearly on that and understand that, right? Tomboys are cute, endearing even. Now, what if your 5-year-old boy wants to wear a dress? What if your 7-year-old boy wants to wear makeup? What if your 12-year-old wants to put on nail polish and says he wants to be a nurse or he wants to be an elementary school teacher, or he wants to be a stay-at-home parent, or he all of these roles that have been typically reserved for women. I know a lot of you are sitting home saying, I don't care, it's whatever he wants. Societally, let's all admit, he's going to have a rougher go. Now, here's my big question. Why? I really want to pause. I wish this was live because I want to pause and I really want to ask you, why is it okay, for the most part, for girls to have incredibly feminine and more masculine and express more masculine specific characteristics, either with the way they dress or the games they play or the toys they play with or the careers they advance themselves into? But it is less, substantially less okay for men to shift toward the feminine. And this is where we step into the land of sexism. And it's not even sexism. It is because it feeds into the same type of problem. And genderism isn't a word, but I'm going to use it anyways. This notion that we haven't just divided masculine and feminine characteristics. We haven't just created a feminine list and a masculine list. Here's the danger, or a bigger danger, because the lists in themselves are garbage. We've prioritized. We've prioritized time and time again the list of masculine characteristics as being superior, as being better. This is what leaders are built with. This rationality, physically and intellectually competitive, individualistic. All of these qualities are more. And I'm speaking about my culture, okay, guys? Like, I'm speaking about North American culture. I can't speak to another culture. It's not in which I live. It's not in which I've studied. But then we prioritize it. So when girls act more masculine, to a point, because we will have a cutoff, and the cutoff is apparently when you get a fade that looks like mine, to a point, we say they're moving up the ladder. Well, they're getting better, right? They're progressing. Well, because these are the qualities we admire, and these are the qualities we've attributed to men and masculinity. That's why this dichotomy and this binary is so incredibly divisive and destructive. And when guys start exhibiting maybe more emotional characteristics or start physically showing that maybe, according to these gender rules, they want more aesthetics from the feminine side, they're A, horrifically discouraged, B, usually bullied and harassed, C, their sexuality is immediately called into question. And by the way, gender and sexuality are completely separate things. They're moving down the ladder. So as they move down the ladder, people get upset, especially the men, predominantly men that watch that transgression, because what they're doing is they're causing a disempowering. If masculinity is the power place or the power gender, you're disempowering. Now, some people are going to say, no, the list of feminine is just as strong as masculine and yada, yada, yada. Maybe to them. I don't need to discount how they internally feel. And do I think they should be equitable? Sure. But I still say, A, the hierarchy exists, and B, the division is built to subordinate and oppress. The division is built to put people in a box and create, I'm going to use this term, a very functionalist society. Functionalism makes everybody super, super comfortable. I don't know if anybody's ever read A Brave New World, but in Brave New World, Adolf Huxley, he sort of creates this dystopian future in which you are born into a role, they condition you to be in that role, and then that's what you do, right? That's what you do. You know from the day you're born what you're supposed to do in that society, and society knows. And so society runs like this machine, right? You were born to work in the fields, great, that's where you go. You were born to be a scientist, that's where you go. And right from the get-go, we map your genetic makeup, because it's a sci-fi future. We map it, and we know exactly genetically what you're predisposed to be good at. We roll you off. Well, functionalism is a much lesser version of that. And in a functionalist society, who you are, where you're stationed, how I can assess who you are and what you should be doing puts you in a particular role of society, and that's what you fill. And if you fill it, the whole society works better. Now, that's true for all walks of life, but when it comes to men and women, look, guys, it's pretty crystal clear, right? Historically, and now, women have babies. Great. For the most part. Women that have a uterus, or an individual that has a uterus, and I'm going to change that a little bit because obviously we have a new sort of element that is worked in here, including trans women and trans men. But an individual who has a uterus has the capacity to form a baby and give birth to that baby. Well, it makes sense that historically women give birth to the baby. They actually produce food for the baby. Well, they stay home with the baby. Of course, guys go off and do whatever guys did. Back in the day, it was hunting. And then you merge into a society in which we have today. So you have this biological reality of women giving birth, of women bearing a child. And because of this biological reality, we divide everything else you're ever going to do into a feminine and a masculine. So the presumption that moms make better parents, more maternal, more nurturing, more caretaking. But we forget, we've trained them from birth to be that. And we wonder why men aren't fulfilling the same roles. Well, because we haven't trained them that way. We haven't put that expectation on them. That's why so many dads say things like, I'm babysitting my kids this weekend. What? They're not babysitting, dude. They're your kids. So when we do this, though, we create this binary, this either or, here or there, yes or no. And that's not where anybody actually lives. So A, it is limiting. B, it doesn't even exist. The Hindus said it a very long time ago that gender's a delusion. Of course it is. It's a delusion we create in order to put people in categories to make a functionalist society, to make it run smoother, not to make it run better, not to make the individual better, but to make the society better. I have a huge problem with functionalism. So we have this kind of gender dichotomy that people have wanted to blow up for a very long time, and they push boundaries on different ways. And over the generations, you've seen it, right? God, women used to, I think like Katharine Hepburn was one of the first significant movie stars to step on stage in pants. People are having night. Are you joking? What are you wearing pants for? And you see all of this progression of what women can do and how they can do it. And some of the first challenges to gender weren't by choice, they were by force, and they came in the shape of World War I and World War II. World War One rolls around, men go off to war, and women fill all of their jobs. Can you imagine what kind of an awakening that would be? Remember before World War I, before 1919, 1920, women couldn't vote. They weren't people. They weren't considered people under law. But all of a sudden, when they were needed, they stepped up and they worked as bankers, as clerks, as shop owners, as factory workers, running farms, bankers, everything. They did everything. I often wonder what it would have been like to step into those roles in those days, because 5 minutes ago, you're just told those aren't your spaces. You can't do that. Your job is to be at home with the kids, unless we need you to do more. Now, after World War I, for the most part, they gave up those roles. The men came back. They said, here's my punch card, here's my apron, here's my whatever. I'm going to go back home and take care of the kids. You got this here, amazing. We'll go right back to the way it all was. But something changed. Something shifted. And it wasn't because there was this genuine, all of a sudden women wanted to do different things. No, 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 no. All of a sudden, women realized they could. And then you have the Depression, and then you have World War II. And when World War II came and women stepped into those roles, when the war was over, they weren't so ready, willing to step back out. So that kind of feminist movement, even though feminism started way before then, but that kind of feminist movement had now mass support, right? All of these women, you have images like Rosie the Riveter. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but Rosie the Riveter became this image of a woman, of a welder and a machinist, something incredibly masculine. And they didn't so much want to step out of those roles anymore, but we came back from that war and they stepped out to some degree. And you saw this huge push of movies. This huge push of movies. You saw it after World War II, trying to show women back in the home, right? But you saw elements of how everything has changed, which all led into the 50s, right into the 60s. And then, as you guys know, in the 60s and 70s, all hell broke loose. Women wanted jobs. They wanted childcare. They wanted maternity leave. They wanted support from the government. They wanted equal pay for equal work. They didn't want, and this was a time where women worked in or stepped into their jobs and got paid half of what men did. Why? Well, because there was an assumption that she went home to a husband who made the real wage, and you were just saving up some hat money, or they'd call it pin money, whatever they would call it. That a woman doing the same job as a man was just because she wanted extras. Those frilly things women want that are insignificant, that men shouldn't have to pay for. These are the roles we lived with. And then you saw this huge push. And in this time, we're pushing into the 80s, you saw some of the most uh, vitriol-filled rage conversations go on daytime talk shows. Oprah, Phil Donahue, for those who are my age, between two groups of people, not men. Stay-at-home moms and working moms. And they both had seemingly so much animosity and hate to one another, right? They both had reasons why what they were doing is best and why what the other was doing was less than in any capacity. And you saw women are pitted one against another. Well, that's because the entire system has been set up for women to be pit against one against the other. They should have realized they should have been supporting both, but we don't. And all of this was created with dichotomies and binaries in mind. Stay-at-home mom, working mom, two very different people. You can be one or the other. Which side are you on? Who do you support? How do you support them? And then amassing this kind of anger and animosity between the two. All the while still trying to fill some sort of expectation of what feminine was. And the more they try to push on the feminine, the more it got pushed back. Right? Then, as women would push a little too hard, i.e., my fade, then our sexuality would be called into question. Our womanhood would be called into question. Now, is it fair to say that I'm gay? Sure. Sure. But there's lots of parts of the Midwest I can go to in the United States of America and look around and I'm astounded all those women aren't gay. Because aesthetically, they're not filling that same gender stereotype. Why? Well, they're working on farms or they're working in factories. Very, very different mentality. But as we pit one against the other, we divide it. And so now we're having this huge shift. So we have, obviously, I would say in the last 5 to 10 years, we've had this huge shift in accepting and becoming very culturally aware, even though people who are trans have been around for as long as people. But we are becoming very culturally and politically aware of the trans community. They are starting to gain power and notoriety and political clout, right? They are pushing for their rights. And as they push, and it's been a big push, we start to see this giant pushback. And I often think, I often think, how much of different people from all walks of life, there's all different ways to be a trans person. I want to put that on the table, first of all. If we didn't have these defined binaries, either or, I wonder how much or how the perceived trans community would change. And all of this anger and animosity towards the trans community, you know where it's coming from? Outside of, obviously, incredibly right-wing fanatical religious movements that have no business in politics anyways. It comes from fear that somebody has the audacity to not just jump the gender box that we're still upset about, but to actually jump the box they were put in at birth as their sex. How dare they? How dare they? Because now that primary box that I put you in has been shattered, has been blown up. So now concepts of womanhood and manhood are just blown to a smithereens. And you have all of these older, for the most part conservative, but not just that. You have this older generation reeling from it, right? So you have ridiculous bills getting passed all across the United States trying to stop it, saying it's corrupting kids, saying it's abuse, not allowing them to say gay when you go into Florida or whatever the heck they're all doing down there. And they're doing it because they're trying to stop a fundamental shift, a catastrophic event from blowing up the most significant binary and box that they've lived with their whole lives, and they hold on so tightly with both hands because that is their structural norm. That is their functionalist baseline. Don't change that for me, because then you're going to shift everything. But nobody's asking the actual question because nobody wants to, and nobody likes the answer because nobody is taking a minute to be introspective. And the question is very simple. Why do we care? Why is my first question whether you're a guy or a girl? Why does my tone change when I hold babies? Why do colors on people matter? Why does the bagginess of your jean or the hat you put on your head indicative of what sex you are? And why does that matter? Why does that need to be identified? Those are all big questions. Most people aren't willing to have those discussions. So instead, they attack the community. They repress, they criminalize, they legislate in order to, what, slow the process? Here's what you're not going to slow. Kids are smarter. So in Texas, kids are banging on the desk, calling the Republican governor and his party tyrants. Supreme Court is striking down Abbott's law. You have kids walking out in all sorts of schools, especially in Florida right now with that bill. All of this is happening. Want to know why? Because kids are done, for the most part, with the binary. They don't get it. They don't get it. And what they sure as heck don't get, unless we really drill it into them, and that's what, unfortunately, adults love to do, is why the hate, why the boxes in the first place. One who doesn't care about gender? My grade 7s. They don't care. They don't care, and they get it, but they don't care. Want to know who doesn't care about if a kid is trans or if a kid is gay or if a kid uses they, them pronouns? Kids. They don't care because they see it for what it is. Blowing up something that was useless, that is ancient, and that was only created to make us fit a box and limit who we get to be and how we get to be that person, and that is useless. And that is the antithesis of progress, because progress means whatever I am good at, whatever my soul is good at, and what I am powerful at doing, I do. And if I don't have the space to do that, this world becomes worse tomorrow. And kids see it. It's clear as day for them. It's just not clear for, some politicians and some parents. I think some parents are filled with hate and resentment and anger and animosity towards all that. And I think other parents are just scared. And when you shake foundational roots such as gender and sexuality and identity, when you shake those roots, when you shake that box that they are premising everything else upon, it scares people. And that's why when people ask me my sex, are you a boy or a girl, I don't get angry. Even if they do it rudely, I don't. Because I'm taking the only opportunity I have, usually with complete strangers, to ask them one simple question. Why do you want to know? And that question is the foundational shift. For a minute, whether they like it or not, they're going to have to think about that. Why does it matter? And for a minute, they're going to question it. And more often than not, we're going to start to see a shift across the whole line. So I go softly with people. If they come at me with hate, maybe I go a little bit harder. But for the most part, I go softly. For the most part, I go softly because what I understand is it's a foundational shift and it's terrifying. And they're holding so tightly to old ideals that maybe mean nothing and prove nothing. And were actually destructive to the individual soul, which is so funny because when Republicans are against this, really what you're against is individuality. Heads up, just so you know. Because I don't think the sex you were born has anything to do with the person you're going to be. It doesn't have to. With the job you're going to do, with the passion you're going to bring to this world, with the empathy and care you get to exude, it has nothing to do with your sex. We might try to fashion it so, but genetically, you're born with gifts. All this dichotomous action and binary is just limiting those gifts to a gender that we have assigned to your sex. And if we want to progress and we want something better, just like we don't want to limit somebody's skin color to the job they do, or somebody's religion to the career and the relationships we have, we don't want to do that to sex because we're just limiting society as a whole. So, next time you bring it up, when you're sitting at the dinner table or you're sitting around with your colleagues at work, bring it up. Just talk about it. Do the binaries make sense? Does this dichotomy make sense? What purpose is it serving? How much of list A do I fulfill if I'm a woman or B if I'm a man? And what happens when I do a truly great thing, which is draw on all of those lists, all of those amazing qualities, because they're all amazing qualities when I need them and how I need them, and use them in order to better the world around me. Well, thank you guys very much for hanging out with me another Tuesday. I really appreciate it. Go check my website out at unlearn16.ca. My merch is all 20% off right now if you use unlearn16 as the code, all caps. Thank you so much for hanging out, and I will see you next Tuesday. Same bat time, same bat station. Have a good night, folks. Dismissed.